economics. You recently said that if politics and economics drive the response to this pandemic, this could have dire consequences for health, but also for human rights. Can you explain to us?
Well, you know, what happens is that I believe that when we are facing a pandemic like COVID-19, when there's so many things we don't know about it, any decision to, for example, ease lockdowns or any emergency measures should be driven by science-based facts, very carefully, very prudent, because the risk of losing all the gains that with a lot of sacrifice for so many people staying at home, not working, health workers with a lot of pressure on the health service, etc. If we ease down just because of a political reason, because there's pressure from some sectors, or because there's pressure from businesses, and when they haven't met yet the health conditions to ease those measures, it could mean that will come a new outbreak, as we have seen in some parts of the world. And in some parts we have seen small outbreaks that can be controlled. But if you are not there yet, you haven't reached the peak yet of the cases and of the detected cases on the mortality, I mean, this virus is not going to go away. Huh? It will be here for many years until we get a vaccine. So we need to really, leaders need to take into consideration all factors. I understand. I mean, the economy needs to continue working. People are unemployed. They need income. We need food distribution, food production, etc. And those sectors are still working. And we need lots of things. But I know it's a very complex balance that a politician needs to do, a president of the republic or a prime minister. But it has to be based also on scientific facts. And it has to take all the elements into consideration, and it has to be done gradually in a way that you can be adapting schools, businesses, and other places to a reality where we don't know a lot about. We don't know if this virus is seasonal or not, if in summertime, like a flu that comes in winter, but in summer we almost don't have cases. We don't know. We don't know if it evolves. We don't know if it will mutate. We don't know the way it is. I mean, we know some ways of transmission, some others we don't know. So there's a lot at stake. So that's why we said, let's make decision in a careful, in a serious way, and science-based.
Okay.
Of course, you have to consider some political and economic issues, but it should be on science.
Right. I want to get to human rights. Many governments have declared states of emergency, have imposed curfews, lockdowns. Are you concerned about the rule of law, that some governments, some leaders might use the pandemic to crack down on dissent, on the opposition? There are a number of instances where there is strong suspicion that this is indeed happening.
Well, yes. I mean, you know, the international human rights law permits the restriction of certain freedoms in cases like the pandemic or natural disasters, etc. But we're talking mainly on freedom of mobility, freedom of assembly. But in no way it accepts and to use it as an excuse to restrict the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press, or the freedom of being the possibility of being critical if the government is not doing what they're supposed to do. And we have seen that. We have seen in some places they have passed bills and laws to restrict the freedom of criticism, to define as fake news anybody, and that has a lot of punishment or fines, or they also have been detaining journalists or human rights defenders. And in some other places, they have passed sort of a decree, not through parliament, not through the judicial system, to increase the powers that the president has or that the security forces and the military have. So when we restrict certain human rights because of a need like a natural cause or a pandemic like this one, it has to be, first of all, it has to be a clear need. It has to be proportionate to the need, and it has to have a time bound. It cannot be forever. So in many places we have seen that some governments are using it to shrink, to make even more shrink the civic space and the possibility of civil society to express, and they are also threatening journalists and diminishing the freedom of press, and that is unacceptable.